The first and most basic commitment that any employer makes to their employees is they're going to pay them what they said they were going to pay them. When we do payroll well, they get to take that promise for granted. And when payroll is not done well, it calls into question every other promise that an employer makes to employees. If you were 80 years old and you were retired, what you would regret, and work backwards from there. This is particularly when you're making career choices or life choices or whatever else. Think about what you, at the end of your career, at the end of your life, would regret, and work to minimize that now.
Today's episode of the Payroll Podcast is sponsored by Deel. Now take a moment to consider the following pre-show scenario. Imagine you had to visit 6 different houses just to cook your dinner. One place has the pots and the pans, another has the stove, another has the food. You get the idea. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, the reality is most global businesses operate exactly the same way, using 6 different tools and platforms just to pay their global workforce. But now there's one platform offering truly simple, truly global payroll, and that's today's sponsor. That's Deel. That's Deel. And Deel's fully managed global payroll makes it possible to pay your entire team in over 100 countries and in over 200 currencies, all in one place. So whether you're an enterprise company, a small business, or something in between, Deel is built to meet your unique business needs. With in-house customer success managers, local payroll experts, and more, Deel's fully managed global payroll eliminates third-party handovers and instead provides unmatched compliance and flexibility. In fact, they'll even help you track and flag the latest changes in payroll regulations before they even become an issue. And with 24/7 monitoring and best-in-class security protocols, your sensitive data is always protected. So are you ready to change your global payroll system? If you are, click the link in the show notes to book your demo with Deel today. Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Payroll Podcast, where we're going to delve into the intricacies of global payroll and then dive into the fascinating stories behind them. And today we've got a really exciting guest. Before I introduce him to you all, let me introduce myself. My name is Nick Day. I'm CEO at JGA Recruitment Group. We're a specialist payroll recruiter operating in the UK, in Europe, and now the US as well. We are finding the best payroll talent across the globe to help our clients with those really difficult talent challenges you have in the world of payroll. And we know payroll is complex. Now, of course, if you're a regular listener to this show, please do remember to subscribe to it. Please review it if you can. And most importantly for me, please share it with your payroll colleagues and friends so that together we can really raise the profile of payroll globally for everyone. Now, today we're going to be exploring the dynamic world of global payroll management with a special focus on large-scale operations. And to do that, we have a very special guest, Gregory Harmer, who's joining me today. He's a seasoned executive who has led global payroll, finance, and HR operations across several Fortune 500 companies. He's also managed global payroll operations for, wait for it, a massive 1.7 million employees. Now, with over 3 decades of experience, Gregory has transformed payroll management on a global scale. He's currently the VP of Finance for Payroll and Related HR Services at Amazon, and he was responsible for helping them to manage the expansion of their global payroll services, scaling it from 70,000 employees, which, let's be honest, is a pretty big number to start with, to an impressive 1.7 million that I just mentioned, but that's across 63 countries as well. I'm not sure it gets more complex than that, but just to make it more complex for Gregory, he didn't just focus on expansion, he also innovated and developed the Amazon Anytime Pay solution, which has really revolutionized how employees access their wages. So that's enough from me. I want Gregory to tell us the story. So without further ado, Gregory, welcome to the Payroll Podcast. How are you feeling today?
Nick, so good to be here. I've been following your podcasts, and I really enjoy being with people who appreciate the geeky and nerdy art of payroll and how important it is.
Yeah, me too. As do our listeners, of course. Let's jump into the geekiness straight away. My first question, something I ask all my guests to kick off with. What does the word payroll mean to you?
So the first and most basic commitment that any employer makes to their employees is they're going to pay them what they said they were going to pay them. And that's when we do payroll well, they get to take that promise for granted. And when payroll is not done well, it calls into question every other promise that an employer makes to employees. Every aspect of the deal that causes people to have trust in their employers and choose to work for their employers comes into question if we don't keep that first and most basic commitment. And so for me, payroll equals trust more than anything else. That is the game that we play. That is the value that we provide. That is what is at stake with payroll. Sure, there's the all the other mechanics around payroll. There's compliance and there's controllership and there's financial reporting and there's a whole lot of other things that have to happen. But the reason it's so interesting, the reason it's so important, the reason it's so challenging is it ultimately comes down to trust.
Yeah, fantastic. What a great way to start the show. I think for those that may or may not be familiar with an episode I recorded with Stephen Covey, he talks about, and that was a payroll podcast about a year ago now, he said, if we haven't got trust, we can't inspire. We need to trust, and then we can inspire people. So, he's certainly speaking from the same playbook as Stephen Covey, and that's a pretty good playbook to come from, I think. But let's jump into your career path then, because a lot of people say they fell into the world of payroll. That's something I'm trying to get people to come out of that word fall. I think we need to own the choice a little bit more, but I don't want to influence your response to this. So tell us about how you got yourself immersed in this wonderful world.
I like to call it a payroll origin story. Kind of like, it's very popular superhero movies now, and there's always an origin story. How did you become the thing that you are? And I believe everybody does have a payroll origin story. I wouldn't describe it as falling into either, but it's also a thing that very few people set out intentionally to go and do. So my origin story, I first came out of college in a very traditional finance and accounting track. My first job was with IBM doing internal audit. And my intention was to do internal audit for some number of years and then move into a series of progressive accounting, finance, controllership type roles, and eventually be a controller or a CFO at an organization. It's a very typical career track for somebody who comes out with, as I did, a finance degree and a master's degree in accounting. And so I was working in internal audit for IBM, and I was asked to participate in an audit of IBM payroll. This is in the early to mid 1990s, and that was a follow-up audit to an audit that happened a couple of years before that the payroll or the audit team at IBM had failed. And the rules back in those days at IBM, I don't know if it's still true, is if you failed 2 audits in a row, there was a leadership change. There was just a mandatory leadership change. Typically, the top 2 layers of the organization would be asked to leave and either leave the company or go and do something else. And this was a very, very difficult audit that happened. We found lots and lots of things that dramatically needed to be improved, and just a lot of opportunities, a lot of risk. If you've been around payroll for a long time and you've seen payroll go bad, you know how bad it can be. And the audit just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And what was supposed to be just a 30-day engagement ended up being a 6-month engagement. And at the end of that 6 months, they were looking to replace. They'd already replaced the global leader of payroll at IBM, but they were looking to replace the leadership team that reported to him. And they looked around and they saw me and they offered it to me. And I was just a kid. And this was a time at IBM to break into a management role of that level. You had to have 10 years with the company, and you usually had to wait for somebody to retire. And they offered to me. I'm like, I couldn't say no. And but plus, I'd found the discipline of payroll interesting. But the deal that I made with IBM at the time was I said, look, I'll come and I will do this, and we'll do it for what we estimated to be a 2-year period of time until we achieve certain objectives, and then I would go back and I would be allowed to manage an internal audit team, go back to traditional finance and accounting track. And I ended up spending that 2 years, and it was a really, really great 2 years. I learned a lot. It was a great journey, and I got to the end of that, and it was time to go back to internal audit. And I got called by a headhunter to be the global leader of payroll at Delta Airlines, and I was just a kid, kind of a ridiculously big job. To offer to someone, and I looked at that and I said, what a fantastic opportunity. And my deal with Delta Airlines when I took that role was I would come in and I would lead their global payroll team, and I would do that for a 2 to 3 year period of time, and then I would move into managing the internal audit function at Delta, because there was everyone's understanding that that's explicitly what I was going to go back and do.
Yeah.
So I took that job and I went to Delta, which was a crazy fun time. The Delta global payroll team at the time was 40 people. I was literally the youngest person on the team. And I was the global leader of payroll. What a great learning opportunity that was. And I did that for 3 years. And as agreed, I then moved into managing an internal audit function, which is the discipline that I'd started and had come out of. And after about a year of that, I found myself deeply unmotivated and didn't really understand why. And that's when I realized how much I missed the thrill of payroll. And I woke up 7 or 8 years into my career and realized I had become a payroll person, and it is what I loved. And so I left Delta and I went to another company. And what I've done since then is I've always had other things till I came to Amazon, but but payroll would be part of the portfolio, and payroll would be my first love. And I'd grow other functions around it. There's various HR service type functions that go around payroll, or in some companies I've been responsible for if payroll reports into finance, AP and AR, and general accounting and other functions around that. But I've always had payroll and payrolls ever since that day when I woke up and realized how much I had missed it. And I think that's common to people's payroll origin stories. They come in expecting to do it for a period of time, and they don't really realize how much has changed them, and how much they love it until they leave it, and then they miss it. And I think that's because there is a human element to payroll that is just different. On paper, to an outsider, payroll and AP can look very similar. They're both financial transaction functions, where AP has an invoice, payroll has a time card, and there's a lot of similarities to them. And AP is a super important function. If you don't pay your vendors accurately and on time, that's bad for the company. But it does not have the immediacy and the human impact of payroll does. There are humans at the end of everything that we do in payroll. And when we do it well, those humans get to take for granted that the money they're relying on to provide for their family is going to be there. And when we do it poorly, we create genuine hardship for people, financial hardship and distractions and things that make it hard for them to do their jobs and make it hard for them to trust their employer and trust their pay and everything else. And that means our bad days in payroll are worse because there's humans on the end of it, and we feel that more intensely. But it also means that there's an importance and an immediacy and humanity to what we do that just does not exist to the same degree in other disciplines. And I think that's why so many people come into payroll and it touches them in a way that they do not expect. And they wake up one day and they find that they have become payroll people.
No, what a great response. I love listening to that. I was using your super hero analogy at the start, right? With great power comes great responsibility,
sure.
Right? And this is something
that's right.
we've discovered in the world of payroll. I think the other commonality, you talked about a couple there, and one of them is that when people do discover payroll, many of them do absolutely love it. And you're absolutely right. I never thought when I came out of the theatre masters, right, I'd end up in recruitment, but I love the industry. It wasn't on my horizon. And for those that come into payroll, it's kind of the same. You may not have wanted to do that when you came out of your university, in your instance, do the financial degree and masters, but we find this wonderful profession. And sometimes the tentacles get in and we don't want to let it go, right? We want to hold it because it does give us so much. And we do have so many touch points on individuals. And as you say, their financial well-being, their livelihoods, the way that they enjoy their work and everything else that goes beyond. Something that I picked up on, and I'll be honest, and I'll give a shout out here because this comes with previous knowledge, but you were thrown in at Delta there with 40 employees. I think you said you were the youngest in the function, something I didn't know until you shared that with me just now. But what I do know prior to this conversation is Sarah Chesney, who I know has worked for you before, said, look, Gregory is one of the most inspirational leaders I've ever had the opportunity to work for. This is someone who just inspires those around him. Now, what I would say is, I obviously haven't worked with you directly, but leadership is something that I think sometimes is difficult in the world of payroll. People get promoted because they're great at payroll, and they don't necessarily get the training and the support they need to understand what great leadership looks like. So I'm going to assume that you are a great leader because I've heard that, and that's been referenced externally to today's call. And obviously you've proven yourself in a department where you were the youngest and had to kind of, I guess, inspire those around you. So I'd love to get a bit of an insight into how you see leadership, how you've been so successful in the leadership roles that you've had, and also for those listening, if they are struggling in a leadership role because they've been promoted or they're great at payroll but haven't had that training, where they can go or what they can do to help their own leadership journeys. I realize that's quite a big question.
That is a big question, and since you touched on development and opportunity, I'll focus on that part of it. And it's very kind of Sarah to say that. To the extent that I've had success in inspiring people, it probably comes more from my passion for this discipline and how important it is, and how impactful we are to people than anything else. And if you, that's not common in most kinds of business functions. But let's talk about leadership and let's talk about people development. I'll tell you a thing that I learned early on at Delta and have to keep relearning. There is an important difference between the standard and expected career path being standard and expected, and having it be the only career path. There are many people who will follow a career path that is traditional and intentional, and that is just fine. And if you think about how people come into payroll, so a lot of people come into payroll, they'll come in from an HR background, because payroll is the administrative back end of HR, and it's very HR adjacent. And some people like me will come into payroll from a finance and accounting background, and that's just fine. But a lot of really, really great payroll careers come from completely unexpected ways and completely unexpected places. And employers who dial too much into, this is the type of person that we're looking for, and this is the type of career path we expect people to have, and we're going to manage people along that career path, miss many of those very, very best opportunities. And the best payroll teams that I've ever been associated with, including the one that I lead currently at Amazon, there is a crazy wide diversity of experiences that people bring into that job. So there are people. If I look at the people who report to me and lead parts of Amazon's global payroll team, there are a couple who came up through traditional payroll tracks. There are some who just came out of the business. They ran segments of Amazon's business and different parts of its business, and they took a really big career leap when they saw that there was an opportunity in payroll and thought, "Huh, that's kind of interesting. I will go and try that." There are some people who came at it from total non-payroll backgrounds, non-finance, non-HR backgrounds, and it's just a thing that they grew into. And that diversity of people's experiences makes us much stronger as a leadership team. But it also is inspiring to other people on the team to see there is not just one path to be able to grow in a payroll organization. And as soon as you block it, so there's just one path that can grow in an organization, that's when that's when you become too narrow, and people's career opportunities go and get blocked. I'll tell you a thing that an example of this that we learned at Amazon. We learned it the hard way, but it's been such a profound lesson for us. So Amazon is a company. This is everything I'm going to tell you. We publicly disclosed and we've talked about for a long time. Amazon as a company struggled for a very, very long time in having a healthy representation of women in our leadership in our business. And we got really serious about this 6 or 7 years ago about why that was. And we look at women were underrepresented in our entire population of our business, but particularly underrepresented in leadership roles, and that included in payroll. And we did a lot of data studies on it. Amazon's a massive employer, and so we have huge amounts of data, and there's things that we can go and study. And one of the things we learned fairly early on is that if you think of recruiting as a pipeline, and the beginning of the pipe is when someone comes and expresses an interest in working at your company. The end of the pipeline is when they get selected. If we looked at representation at the end of that pipe and representation at the beginning of the pipe, it looked the same on both ends of it. And so our problem wasn't how we were selecting leaders. Our problem was the representation of women in leadership positions that were actually applying for our jobs, which is a different problem than selection. It's an attraction problem. We thought, that's really, really strange why that would be. We felt good about that because that meant that we weren't discriminating as part of our interview process, but we felt bad about it because we still didn't understand the problem. And here's what we eventually figured out. In any job posting, there will be what are different companies call them different things. Some companies will call them basic qualifications, and some of them will call them preferred qualifications, BQs or PQs. And a basic qualification is what you say is this is what is required for the job. And then a preferred qualification, you say this is what would be nice to have for the job, right? The BQ is the required, the PQ is the nice to have. And what we found, and this was consistent with other studies that have been done outside of Amazon, that if an applicant is a man and they see that they meet some of the BQs but not all of them, they will apply anyway, because what have they got to lose? Women tend to be more rule following, and if they see that they don't meet all of the basic qualifications, they won't apply for the role because they say, well, that's what's required for the role. And what we found was, so that's the first point. The second point we found was when we'd go and probe role by role, what's a basic qualification, what's a preferred qualification, and we asked ourselves, okay, you've called that a basic qualification. Is it really critical and necessary for the job? A pretty good percentage of the time, the answer was no. And so we were unintentionally screening off women candidates from leadership positions by over including what was in basic qualifications. And the most basic of basic qualifications is a college degree. And it was just a thing. It was just a protocol that we had followed forever. We'd said, well, every leadership position that exists in payroll requires a college degree, and therefore it's a basic qualification. And then we found, actually, in the right circumstance for the right experience, we'd hire people without a degree, and it would be fine. But women who did not have degrees would not apply for our roles. And if you've been around payroll for a while, you know a lot of really senior payroll leaders in organizations around the world have a story that goes something like this. They dropped out of college to have a family and raise their children. And they did that for some number of years, and then they went back into the workforce. And when they went back in the workforce, they didn't go back to college. They went directly back to work without a degree. And in many labor markets, including U.S., if you're coming into the labor market without recent experience because you've been raising your kids and without a degree, the type of job that you're eligible for tends to be an administrative type job. And so they'd get a job working as an administrator, maybe what back in the day we might even call a secretary, but an administrative type role in a small company. And one of the responsibilities they'd be given in that small company would be payroll. They'd be doing the payroll for 3 or 4 or 5 people, probably in a partially outsourced payroll. And they found that they liked it and they were good at it. And they learned a lot about payroll in doing that. You could do a payroll for 5 people and learn all the basics of payroll. And they found that they liked it. And so the next job they took was a payroll centric job in a larger company, which they were able to get because they had some payroll experience. And then 2 or 3 career moves down the line, they're running payroll for a Fortune 500 company without a college degree. There's just a lot of people in our industry who that's their story, and they're almost all women who have that particular story. And so if you go into the market and you say, we're going to have a BQ that you have to have a college degree, you are screening off a lot of your very, very best candidates for going and doing that. And that caused a fair amount of internal turmoil within the company. There were a number of people who were opposed to that. I said, that's a basic qualification. It's happened for every role. And a number of other leaders pushed against that and said, no, we're comfortable hiring people who have the right experiences without a degree. And when we did that, when we changed that, scoured down what was in our BQs, we left them in our PQs, and that's fine. And the vast majority of people we hire have a degree, but some of our best leaders that we hire don't. It completely changed what was happening at the front end of the pipeline. And suddenly, the candidate pools that we were interviewing had much, much better women representation, and that played itself out over time. Now, the way, if you take that basic principle now and you apply that to every other move that happens in a person's career once they've joined your company, and you're open to, yes, there's an expected path, right? There's an expected set of qualifications for a person to move into this leadership role. But just because there's an expected path does not mean that needs to be the only path. And as soon as you take the expected path and say, we're going to block off all other paths, you are no longer on the side of inclusion, and you are no longer on the side of inspiration. Because many of the best leaders who are going to grow up in our industry and succeed in our industry are going to come from non-traditional paths. That's probably the most insightful thing and valuable thing that's happened to me as a leader coming into Amazon and at Amazon.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, lots of insights to take away from that. And as you're speaking to the converted here in the world of recruitment, right? A lot of the work that we do will be, we get a job description, but my mission is to find out what's behind the job spec. Right, that's a document you put out there because you need to, but we all know that any job description that exists in the marketplace, it very rarely actually highlights the problem that needs to be solved. It's a list of duties you need to do, but actually you'll say, Nick, within this function, I've got a problem here, here, and here. I've got I need someone who's really strong on maternity or paternity or whatever it might be, right? And we homogenize job descriptions, and if we do that and we're strict to them, we homogenize our workforces, and that can be a problem. What I really like about what I heard you say there is, and I think it's really positive. I think more organizations can do this. I know Amazon's of a certain scale and size and public profile, but actually there's nothing wrong with saying we're not yet at the place we want to be in terms of our gender representation, is the example that you gave earlier, right? It's showing the market that we recognize we've got work to do and we're doing the things we need to do to try and correct that problem. I think a lot of organizations are too fearful of just saying, hey, you know what, we've identified there's a misrepresentation here or whatever it might be, and we're actually doing the right things to try and correct that, and we're being proactive about it. And I think the more we do that, the more we're able to open those barriers of communication. We're going to be able to open up the marketplace as well, with people being more comfortable and confident applying for positions that maybe don't tick every single box, because we know that skills is only half the talent challenge anyway, right? The other half is behavioral, attitude, culture fit, and all those kind of things that go with it. And I think you raise many points. There's a whole podcast in itself there in terms of talent attraction in the world of payroll. I mean, we'll get you back, Greg, and we'll dive in on that a little bit more. But I think you'd certainly given a good insight in terms of your analytical nature to it as well. So I want to dive into that a little bit more, because in my introduction, I mentioned you've at Amazon, it started with 70,000 employees. For many, that's no small feat on its own, right? That's a big payroll. Certainly for my UK listeners, there aren't many organizations in the UK that have that many employees. But you've now scaled that operation to not just 1 million, but 1.7 million employees. That's significant. I'd love to know some of the challenges you faced in scaling those operations. One of them I think you've highlighted, which is potentially recruiting top talent and a gender balanced talent as well. But what are some of the other challenges you were faced with in scaling something of that size? Because there can't be many other examples of projects that kind of match this, really. Hello, global payroll leaders. Are you facing challenges in finding the right payroll talent for your team? If you are, I hear you. And I'm here to offer you a solution, because at JGA Payroll Recruitment, we're experts at sourcing, attracting, and engaging with top-tier global payroll talent that really drives business success. So don't let the frustration of finding great payroll professionals hold you back from raising the profile of payroll in your organization. The cost of a poor hire isn't just financial, it costs you time, or worse, it damages the reputation of your payroll operation. That's why we're 100% dedicated to ensuring your recruitment journey with us is nothing short of exceptional. Partner with us at JGA because we're an award-winning global payroll recruitment agency with a proven track record of success. We have over 100 five-star Google reviews, and we're trusted by many of the world's leading brands. And we would love to help you elevate your team with the best payroll talent available anywhere in the world. Reach out to us today at 01727 800 or 377, or visit us at jjrecruitment.com. And while you're at it, why not sign up to our weekly payroll newsletter for exclusive industry insights and job opportunities? With us, your perfect payroll opportunity or your perfect payroll hire awaits.
I think what's happened at Amazon the last 11 years is unprecedented in global employment history. I don't think there's ever been a growth challenge that's like it. And it's super interesting. It's been just a fantastic ride. I'll talk about your question in two parts. I'll give an example of the scaling challenge and how you have to think differently about it in a company that's growing that fast. But then I want to talk a little bit about what happened during the pandemic for us, because I think what happened for the pandemic at Amazon, and actually a lot of other companies too, fundamentally changed how people in our industry have to think about change and what the business expects from us. First, on the scaling thing, one of the fun things about payroll is if you're doing a payroll for 5 people, all the basic challenges and complexities that exist within payroll are there. If you're paying one employee in France, you have to be smart on all the labor and regulatory and tax and everything else requirements in France, and so scale is only one component of it. And so payroll can be really, really interesting and really, really challenging at any scale. And by the way, that's one of the things I enjoy as a leader, is actually recruiting people who come from large payroll organizations and people come from very small payroll organizations, and they bring very different capabilities when you go and do that. Because if you come from a small payroll organization, you actually have to do more things. You actually become broader in your payroll knowledge. Okay. Cool. Anyway, but at some point, a difference in scale becomes a difference in kind. And the way you have to think about it, so Amazon, in the time I've been here, has grown 23x. And what will happen is everything that we do, every system that we use, every framework that we have operates effectively and is designed to operate effectively to a certain scale. That applies to systems, processes, it even applies to org charts. You can design your org and that will make sense at a certain scale. And then there's a scale beyond which it stops making sense anymore. But if we'll just stay with systems. So you'll implement some system and you say, okay, we had to implement this system because we outgrew our old system. And when you implement a new system, you don't set it up with the expectation that it handles your current scale, because you don't want to outgrow it the next day. You want it to be able to handle some additional growth. And what companies will typically do, whether they're doing this consciously or not, they'll typically do it to handle about 4x their current scale. Because they don't have to replace it right away. And if you set it at 2x, that seems too low. And if you set it at 10x, that seems too high. And so typically, if you talk to people who specialize in this and do implementations, they'll say typically you do it about 4x. Well, okay, so if you implement a system and it can handle 4x your current scale, and you grow like a typical healthy company, let's say 10% a year, which is a pretty healthy growth. Let's say your business grows at 10% and your workforce grows at 10% a year. At 10% growth with compounding, you double in size every 7 years, which means if you implement a system to handle 4x your current scale, it's going to be good for 14 years. Seems in the way business operates, seems forever, seems like a very reasonable period of time, and that's what you do. You go set it at 4x scale. At Amazon, in the time I've been here, we have doubled in size on average every 21 months. And so if you're growing that fast and you set something to be 4x your current scale, that means you have to replace it in 3.5 years. And you typically have about a year burn-in period where you've just implemented it and you're working out what all the kinks are before you feel really good about it. And so you set things for a 4x scale. You by the time you have it in, you feel good about it. Now it's time to start planning what you're going to do to go and replace it. Well, okay. So there's two things that I learned from that. One is uh, we have to be intentional about setting something larger than a 4x scale. We'll typically set more like a 6x scale when we go and plan for it. Now that's kind of hard from a planning standpoint, because you have to look and say, well, okay, in the UK right now, Amazon's got in the neighborhood of 100,000 employees, and as it happens, we're implementing a new technology in the UK, and we look at it and they go, well, what do we want to be able to handle? And we say, well, we want it to be able to handle 600,000 employees, and we'll hear, uh, there's no employers in the UK who have 600,000 employees. Oh, yeah, but
No.
that's what we need a plan for. They say, well, then you end up working some compromise, and maybe it's 400,000, maybe it's 500,000, something like that. But you have to think bigger. You naturally have to think bigger. But you also have to be willing to tear down things that you've built and then rebuild them. If you set something at a 4x scale and it doesn't have to be replaced for 14 years, odds are by the time it comes around to that 14 years, it's a different leadership team by the time you get there, right? Because we've moved on or whatever else. And so the things that we tear down and replace are things that people before us built, and maybe we honor it and respect it and whatever else, but it's somebody else's thing. And there is, that can be surprisingly hard if you put your heart and soul into going building something. And again, this applies to systems and org designs and a whole lot of other things. You put your heart and soul into building something, you become emotionally invested in it. It becomes very, very hard to go and tear it down, because that's your baby. And so you have to be able to emotionally disinvest for things that you itself have created. And if you don't, then you become emotionally invested in the status quo. And if you become emotionally invested in the status quo and the scale has outgrown the status quo, you yourself become the blocker to change. And you have to be conscious of that. So those are the two interesting scale challenges. You have to think bigger when you go and build something or replace something. And then second, you just have to be willing to tear down things you yourself have built and that you've emotionally invested in. Okay, but I'll tell you the other lesson of scale, though. What happened in Amazon in the last 11 years has been unprecedented, but what happened during the pandemic was especially unprecedented. So there was a think piece that was in the New York Times a couple of years ago as we came out of the pandemic, where they were trying to wrap their arms around what happened at Amazon during the pandemic. Because you may recall, so the pandemic happens and lots of things close, lots of stores close, things.
Yeah.
And suddenly a lot of people who had not had to rely on Amazon in the past had to rely on Amazon. This includes my parents, who were in their 80s, and buying something online was unthinkable to them. That was the thing they liked to do. They would get in a car and go to the store, and they would do this once a week. For someone like me who's fully embraced into Amazon, why would I go to a store? I don't go to a store. But they can't, right? It would have been unsafe for them to go and do that. And there were a huge number of people who were in that situation who they suddenly had to rely on Amazon. And so Amazon's business just, it exploded almost overnight. We were a high growth business, but basically doubled in a very, very short period of time. And that was happening at the same time that a lot of our own employees were being impacted by the pandemic too. And where it was going to be difficult for them to go and work in a warehouse, and maybe their kids had been knocked out of school or whatever else. And so our own workforce was in turmoil. And so the only way Amazon could survive that was to go on a hiring spree that is unprecedented in human history. The New York Times, so far as they could tell, the most any employer had ever grown in history. Walmart, in its peak growth period in the 90s, had added 230,000 employees in 1 year, which is a lot. That was the record.
It is a lot. Yeah.
Amazon added 480,000, more than twice that in the first 12 months of the pandemic. It's growth unprecedented in human history. We believe. We don't really know. But as far as we could tell, as far as the New York Times could tell. And then there was some crazy stuff that happened even within that. So there was that growth, but what was happening during the pandemic is there were a lot of new ways we had to invent to go and compensate people, which were really interesting and challenging. There's this concept that came to be called hero pay, where you pay people a premium based on whether they're in proximity with other people, which isn't really normally the way you think of a timekeeping challenge. That was kind of interesting. But one of those sub challenges for us was we historically paid our non-temporary workers biweekly in the U.S. Very large workforce in the U.S. At the time it approached 1 million people, and no, I take it, it's about 500,000 and then became 1 million. But anyway, we had 500,000 people that we paid biweekly. But our temporary employees, we have a seasonal business at Amazon that gets really business around Christmas, including in the UK. And so we'd hire seasonal employees. When you hire seasonal employees, you pay them faster, so we pay them weekly. So we initially go out to the marketplace and we say to all these people who've been furloughed from their jobs, say, come and work at Amazon. And when your job comes back because your company reopens, you go back to your job. But in the meantime, come work for Amazon because we need you. So, which is a very unusual appeal to make to the marketplace, which we did. And we did that. And then we realized a few months into the pandemic that this growth was not going to go away and we were going to need these people. And a lot of them really, really liked working for Amazon. Say, I'd like to stay and work for Amazon permanently. And so we found ourselves taking, in a given week, many thousands of employees and converting them from seasonal employees to permanent employees. And when that would happen, they would go from being paid weekly to being paid biweekly. And if you've ever done that as a payroll person, that's not fun, because the way the employee perceives that is they went a week without pay. Converting someone to a slower pay cycle is very disappointing to people. It's very disrupting to people. And this is happening during the pandemic, when the whole game is to attract and retain as many people as you can. And we looked at that, and the only solution we could come up for that, that would be low friction and make everybody happy, was to convert our entire U.S. workforce from biweekly to weekly. And we did. We converted on very short notice. We converted our entire U.S. hourly population, a population of larger than the state of Wyoming, north of 500,000 people. We converted them from biweekly to weekly. We think that's the largest pay cycle acceleration in human history. What's interesting about that is the way it happened. So somebody got the idea, realized they were recruiting people, actually, who realized we were going to have to do that, and they figured that out, I think, on a Monday, and they wrote a little paper on it. This is what you do at Amazon. You write these little papers, call them white papers or narratives. They wrote a little paper on that, and that paper started circulating on Tuesday. And it made it to me on Thursday, and it made it to the most senior leadership in the company on Friday. So this was an idea that started on Monday, and has made it the most senior leadership on Friday. It actually went to the CEO and the board of directors on Saturday. They were meeting on weekends because things were happening so fast on Amazon. It went to the PR. They approved it. It went to the PR people on Sunday, and we made a global announcement about it on Monday. So at that point, the idea was a week old. This idea we were going to convert our entire workforce in the U.S. from biweekly to weekly, and then we actually did the conversion 3 weeks after that. I've never seen anything move that fast. That's not ordinarily the way you think about really large system changes or program changes in payroll. You have an evaluation period, and then you have a testing period, and then you parallel test and all of those things. I get called and shown this paper on Thursday and said, we got to know now if payroll can do this. And because we're going to the CEO in 36 hours, and you need to tell us, can you do this or not? And I pulled a few payroll people in the room, and we stared at it, and we diagrammed out on a whiteboard how we thought we would do it, and we wrote down a few risks for it, and they said yes or no, can you do it or can you not do it? And we thought really hard about it, and we said, yeah, okay, we can do that, and we did. And it broke basically every rule that I'd ever learned about how you do large scale changes in terms of the timing, the valuation, the risk, and everything else. And ultimately it was successful. Now, the reason that has changed things now is every conversation that I have with senior leadership, and I've talked to other payroll leaders, they have this happen too, because many companies went through similar things, maybe not at this scale, but where you had to invent things really fast during the pandemic and just make those changes and just do it. The question we get asked now is, you did this amazing thing before, why can't you do it again? It is the new level of expectation that we're just going to be willing to innovate and move faster than we did before. And the traditional timelines of, I need a month to think about it, and then I need 3 months to implement it, which actually for a lot of things is fast. No, I need you to tell me now, and I need this in 3 weeks. It's just what leaders expect, and that's one of the things that fundamentally changed during the pandemic. It's a different view of risk. It's a different view of the requirements for being able to move fast, and it is a different way of thinking about scale. It basically scale and bound, and that is. There's an Amazon specific part of that that's unique because of the sheer numbers at Amazon, but that willingness to move fast and the requirements from our business leaders that we move fast and innovate for them, that is universal for any company who had to go through really big challenges of the pandemic.
What a story. It's powerful, really powerful. Just trying to almost, the numbers are so big, they're hard. That's hard for me to.
It's unreal, right? It feels like a video game at some point. It just seems unreal.
Kudos to you and your entire team and anyone that was involved in that project. What a significant project. I think you raised a few interesting points. One of them being when it comes to change. And sometimes the payroll industry is a little bit slow to be willing to change, although it's always able to and it always does adapt to it. But sometimes you get a little bit of resistance to it. But I do find that procrastination is one of the biggest things we can do to prevent progress. And I think you weren't given an opportunity necessarily to procrastinate there. It was kind of a yes or no and let's move forward. And it's all hands on deck. I think that was a really interesting and a very powerful result you got on the back of that. And I mean, the numbers bamboozle me, if I'm honest. I know when they say that, we've always got 20/20 vision with hindsight. So in hindsight, knowing what you know now, knowing that you managed to get that implemented and what an incredible job you did, is there anything you would have done differently? Any real learning outcomes where you go, you know what, we did everything right, we got it out, so it's hard to say would change anything, but actually there's this one thing where had we known that at the time, or knowing what I know now, we would have done anything different?
I'll tell you about the thing that went most poorly.
Okay.
And because it's the thing that went most poorly, it is a thing that I would figure out something different to go and do. But it's uh, well, okay. First, let me talk about something. These are things. Sometimes you're smart, sometimes you're lucky. And I'll tell you about I think that where we got lucky. Um, for business continuity reasons, we had already worked out a plan. This is before the pandemic. Because remember, the pandemic just lands on us, right? There's rumors in December and January about something going on in Wuhan, and someone in Italy
Yeah.
contracts it, and then you get your first U.S. case in February, and then for us on the 8th of March, everybody goes home and they're not allowed to come back in the office for a year. But it hit really fast in those timeframes. Well, for we had a business continuity plan where we were prepared in payroll teams around the world, where if there was some sort of infrastructure event that happened anywhere in the world and people were able to come into the office, like a fire in a building or something like that, that we'd have business continuity. And the way we assured that is when we made sure everybody had a laptop, but then we would periodically do these tests and we'd say, okay, we're declaring today a business continuity test day and nobody's allowed to come into the office for the next 72 hours. And we see, can we successfully run payroll? Everybody doing it remotely. And in places like the UK and the US, you can sort of take for granted the quality of the infrastructure. But in a lot of other countries where we operate, you can't take for granted the quality of the infrastructure. And sometimes you learn that that test is not successful and you have to make additional investments in people's connectivity and other things like that. And we had completed a series of global tests on that just coincidentally in January. And so what we had, and this is an example of just being lucky. We could very seamlessly go to everyone in at the time the global payroll team was 800 people operating in 28 countries. All 800 people in all 28 countries could operate seamlessly transitioning to home. That was not true of a lot of orgs. That was not true of some of the other orgs at Amazon. And so it became a really difficult quest for a lot of organizations just to get laptops if they'd been operating from desktops, or to get connectivity and to try and do that in the middle of the pandemic. And so one lesson learned from that is this is an obvious one. When the event happens, it's too late to work on your business continuity plan. You have to be prepared for it.
Yeah.
We actually hadn't modeled a scenario like the pandemic where it happened worldwide, but we had thought about it side by side. And so that part of it, I think that part of it, maybe we were a little bit lucky, but we were reasonably smart about that. And then the next layer of business continuity of, okay, well, what if connectivity had gone down completely in a particular country? Do you have country to country overlap or redundancies where we can operate for that? And that's what we work on now, right? Because that becomes the next phase of business continuity. So that was the one
Sure.
that went well. The next one for us, though, I, I, I I kick myself for not really having thought that this could happen. So you remember, part of the pandemic was social distancing. It
Yeah.
seems quaint now, but we were really hardcore on, you got to maintain 6 feet between you and the person. And we were doing things in our fulfillment centers with these crowded warehouse type things where, where product goes before it gets to you as the customer, where we were respacing all these facilities to keep people 6 feet apart from each other. And as we were doing that, we found we had two situations where it was really, really difficult to meet the 6 foot requirement rules. One was at the time clock itself, because shifts start and people congregate and they don't want to be late for their shift. And so they kind of congregate around the clock and then punch in. This probably happens at every facility in the world where there's a time clock. And we had that congregating that was happening. And the other that happened is
Yeah.
when people join our company, they have to go through some number of hours of safety training. And the safety training can be videos. It doesn't have to be instructor training, but they have to have some facility to go and do that. And we had classrooms set up in our fulfillment centers, but we were hiring massive numbers of people. And with the 6 foot distancing, you can only put a small number of people in here. And so we just didn't have the physical capacity to go and um, run people through our training. And we're like, well, how are we going to solve this problem? This is one of those things where somebody got an idea on Monday, and then there was a paper on Wednesday, and then we had to decide if we're going to do it on Friday, and then we launched it the following Monday. And the idea was, well, okay, what we're going to do is the whole employee onboarding thing, we're going to make it remote. And so people already apply for Amazon remotely. They apply online, and we're going to accept their application online. And we're going to say, your first day of work, you don't come into work. In fact, your first week of work, you don't come into work. You just stay at home. And you stay at home and you take these online trainings and you go complete your certifications, and then you come into work. And by the way, when you come into work, you're not even going to badge at a badge facility. You're going to badge remotely from a thing on your phone. Well, okay, that worked as far as compliance with social distancing, but we improvised timekeeping on that, because our whole timekeeping methodology was, you touch a clock with your badge and that's how we know you're here, and you touch a clock with your badge again when you leave, and that's how we know you've left. And none of that works if you're working from home. And so we tried to turn our online training tool into a timekeeping tool. And that just didn't work. In principle, it should have worked, but there were too many scenarios we didn't think of. And so we just had a lot of situations where people were taking these online trainings and we weren't paying them correctly. And there's never a good time to not pay an employee correctly, but not paying them when they haven't even started working for you yet and you haven't had an opportunity to earn any trust with them at all, that's really, really super difficult. And then we also failed to anticipate if people were going to do remote badging, which that now did because we didn't want them touching a clock. How do you know when they've inadvertently failed to punch, which is going to happen often? If now what you have to remember is before I walk into the building, I got to do a thing on my phone. And after I walk out of the building, I have to do a thing on my phone. That's a lot harder to remember to do than as I walk into the building, I'm funneled past a time clock where everybody's going like this with their badge, and I do that too. And as I walk out of the building, everybody's funneling by that clock and they're going like this, and I do that too. And so we had a massive number of missed punches, millions of missed punches, and we just didn't scale correctly for going and solving for those two things. Those are the two things that broke most for us. Most things went really, really well. If I look at that and I go, well, what's the lesson learned from that? I'm not even sure what it is because that seemed like such a unique challenge, and what timekeeping solution would ever plan for that?
Yeah, maybe the lesson is just when you're dealing with such scale and you're working so fast, something is always going to fall by the, it's impossible to keep every plate spinning all the time. I think what I took from it actually is the first part of your response, and anybody listening to this, right? I'll give an example of what I'm quite fearful of going forward into the world of technology, and we'll talk about this maybe just a moment, but is there's a huge number of increase in cyber attacks, ransomware attacks, things like that. Payroll data very much there to be got at by the by those more nefarious than ourselves. And I think that people often don't do those continuity checks. They don't do the things that sometimes need to be doing on the basis they think, oh, it's unlikely to happen to us, or I'll do it next week, or I'll do it next month, or I'll do it next year because there's other things going on. And lo and behold, something like this happens that you just can't predict. And I think that the lesson the great example you gave, whether it's fortunate or not, I'd put it down to good planning. That's the way it is, right? You did those continuity checks and you checked that people could work remotely for this potential thing that no one could predict, but actually put you in a good stead. And I think that people listening to this, they haven't done any disaster recovery plans, or they haven't put any kind of continuity process into place, and you're listening to this right now, I'd say, look, don't delay, put those things in place, because you just don't know what's around the corner.
That's right.
But what I think I want to take to as well before we run out of time today, Gregory, because it's while you were managing this scaled operation, which is a phenomenal story on its own, you also spearheaded the Anytime Pay initiative at Amazon. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about that, because this is an innovation. Certainly in the UK, we're seeing a lot more now. Companies starting to bring in pay on demand or earned wage access type solutions. I know it's a little bit more prevalent in the US, but again, you're doing this at scale, and you were very much behind how this works, and it's really had a positive impact on employee satisfaction for those that you're paying at Amazon. So I wonder if you can just give me a little bit more about that story, because you managed to do that alongside, right? I mean, you've been pretty busy.
Well, we actually launched it. The idea we'd been working on before the pandemic, but we launched it during the pandemic. So first, I have to describe it for you. I'll tell you what the pay experience is for Amazonians now. And the way this works is to demonstrate it. I hold my phone in my left hand, and I take my badge. I don't have my badge with me, but let's pretend I have my badge. I have my badge in my right hand.
Yeah.
And now we've taken away remote badging now because the 6-foot requirement doesn't exist anymore. So what happens for an Amazon hourly employee, and any employee can participate, but this is the way an hourly employee experiences it. As they're walking out of the Amazon facility and they've completed their shift, and they take their badge and they touch it to a time clock as they're walking out the door. And let's say in their left hand, they're holding open the employee app that we use for everything. It's called A to Z. And that's where they access Anytime Pay, but everything's there too. That's where they pick up their shift and everything else. And let's say they have that app open in their left hand, and they take their right hand and they touch it to the time clock. And the time it takes them to go from their eyes being on their badge in their right hand to their phone in their left hand, we've captured that punch. We've calculated their pay for the day. We've done the gross to net. We've calculated their net available pay is, and we're showing that to them on the app. And the time it takes for them to go over their eyes from their right hand to their left hand, there it is.
Wow.
And they can take their thumb and they can go, I do it with my thumb, and they can say either one click, pay me all of it, or they can choose to pay some of it or whatever else. But say they one click and they say, okay, pay me all of it. Okay. And now they take their phone and they go to put it in their pocket. Before they make it to their pocket, their phone vibrates if they have the set the way I do. And the reason their phone vibrates is the banking app where we're paying them has received that money and has now sent a confirmation to them that the money is in their bank account, and now they're getting that vibration. A traditional payroll cycle ends, the way it works for our hourly employees when they get their traditional payroll cycle is it ends Saturday at midnight. There's a bunch of validation that happen on timekeeping files that'll come into payroll around Monday or so. We'll do a bunch of validations. We'll run our payroll on Tuesday. We'll release the bank file on Wednesday, and then paydays on Friday. It's a very typical weekly payroll cycle, but that's 6 days between Saturday at midnight when the pay cycle ended and Friday when they get paid. I've just taken that 6-day period of time, done the very same thing by going this. You can do it in about a second and a half, and that's how right now, about 30% of Amazon employees choose to go and get paid. What's interesting about that is all the technology necessary to do that has existed for a while now. You have to have really, really good tight interfaces between your timekeeping system and your payroll system and your banking system and so on. But all of it's 100% doable. And in fact, that's how pay used to be. Back before the Industrial Revolution, people would work and then they would get paid, and then we made it complicated, and then they'd have payroll, and you had to stretch all of that out and everything else. But all of that is solvable from a technical standpoint. I have to get a little bit deeper, and I have deep conversations with people because any payroll geek who's hearing this, they're going, "Well, what about the taxes? And what about this? And what about that? And what about that?" And yeah, there are a lot of what abouts. I can tell you they're all solvable. They're interesting, but they're all solvable, and they can be done. What the industry is doing, including in the UK, and this is really common in the UK, there's hundreds of employers who are doing this. They're using a third party to go and do all of that. And that works fine, but because they're not integrated within their payroll system, the typical offering, in fact, the universal offering in the UK, as far as we can tell, is 50% of your gross pay next day for a fee. Amazon's offer is all of it right now, 24/7 for nothing. We believe that is where everyone will be forced to go over time. Every employer is going to be forced to do that because that's just the right answer. We're going to make all of your pay available to you instantly, and we're not going to charge you a fee for that. Most of the industry is not there yet. I believe everybody's going to get there in time. The payroll industry itself, the payroll technology providers, are way behind on this. Most of them are doing basically no adoption of it all. They're engaging, they're directing you to third parties who are not integrated with the payroll system. I believe over time, it's just going to have to all be integrated the way Amazon did it because it's the right answer. And I'm just telling you, all the technical challenges are solvable. Probably have another podcast and going deeper into all those different technical aspects of it, but they're all 100% solvable.
Yeah, well, listen, I can't say I disagree. I think there is certainly in the UK, there's some what's the word I'm looking for? Some concerns, particularly about the idea of charging the user to access their pay.
It feels fundamentally wrong. Charging employees for their pay just feels fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're going to introduce it, then the employer, if there is a charge, the employer should wear that for me, and that pays you back in dividends to employee engagement and everything else. So, yeah.
Yes, that's a belief right now. I can see it's not inconceivable the HMRC is going to make that a rule, and they should. And the labor regulators in the US should make that a rule too. We should not be charging employees for access to their pay.
And actually, because a lot of the earned wage access is often for those that are going paycheck to paycheck, like the low end of the earnings scale, there's a possibility that if you charge them, it knocks them below national minimum wage anyway. So, if you're already paying them national minimum wage and you charge them, it knocks them below national minimum wage, and the employer could then be at risk. So I think there's quite a few cononsiderations here, and I think that, as I'm in full agreement with you, you shouldn't be charging employees for that privilege. I think there's better workarounds. I agree. We could definitely have a podcast all about tech, but you're working for a business at scale where you must be constantly innovating. I guess you'd have to, but I'd love to know what kind of technologies you're excited about that might be transforming the workplaces in the future. Because I would say, anytime pay might be one of those, but you've already done that. So, where next for you? Where do you think the future of payroll is headed from a technological standpoint? We've got a lot of conversations now around AI. 2 years ago, everyone was talking about blockchain. We haven't really seen that come to the surface in the way that perhaps some companies were anticipating. We're not really paying people in digital wallets yet. There hasn't seemed to be the appetite for it, probably because of the insecurity of the markets, maybe. But I'd love to know, what are you seeing? Because you're seeing this at scale as well, presumably. What are people asking for? Where do you think we need to go? And what should we be excited about?
My opinion about this, and a lot of people in the industry would give you different answers. AI is an enabler for this, but I want to talk about AI itself. I want to talk about the thing that I believe is going to be the next thing that experience for people with their pay. So first and most basic thing is pay employees correctly. Great. But if you go survey people, this is true at our company as much as any other company, and you ask them, even people who are paid correctly, and even if you ask them after they viewed their pay slip and you ask them a basic question like, do you understand your pay? A shockingly high percentage of people say, no, I do not understand my pay. And even if a person is paid correctly, if they don't understand their pay, that's a trust problem. Because look, how do I know it's right? And look, the regulators make this really hard on us, because we have to do different things that are not intuitive for humans to understand. The rules around calculating overtime and holiday pay and what imputed income is and a whole bunch of other things. They're not, a lot of payroll professionals have difficulty understanding those things. But I think the next great journey on this is going to be tools that help employees really understand their pay. So if you can imagine, so everybody has an electronic self-service tool, and you go through that self-service tool and you access your payslip. And right now that payslip is just a static thing that just exists there, just as if it were paper. We took a paper payslip and we recreated it electronically. And maybe as an employer, we've created different guides to answer employees' questions about their pay, but those are also static guides that basically exist as a PDF someplace, and they exist someplace. And so what you'd have to do is look at your pay slip, and you'd have to know where to go find the static guide, and you have to go do the research to try and understand the thing that's on your pay. Well, what if you changed that whole experience and you said, I'm going to go look at my pay slip, and my pay slip is now going to be interactive. I could hover over any particular field on my pay slip, and the AI, where it comes in is it knows the most likely questions people are going to have about that, because it's questions people have had about it historically about that particular description or whatever else it is, and it explains it to them and can even take them directly to a deeper calculation of that, replicating what a human would do if their payroll professional was sitting next to them and they said, I don't understand this thing on my payslip, can you explain it to me? Well, fine. Probably every company has an opportunity for people to do that. Call somebody and ask for an explanation of the pay, but that's clunky and frictiony and difficult and expensive for everybody to go and do. What if you took that whole experience of really helping people interact with their pay slip and really truly understand it? There's a lot of AI underneath it would make that a lot better, and then make that a great experience. So instead of, I believe the typical company on this would have at least 40% of their people who are paid correctly say they don't understand their pay, and make that a much
Yeah.
smaller number. I think that's from our customer standpoint, that's a thing that's going to happen next. We're going to do a much better job of helping them understand their pay. It sounds basic and not sexy, but it's hugely important because there's just so many people who don't.
Can I ask a question then? Because this is I got some interesting feedback. I wrote an ebook on the future of payroll as I see it, utilizing AI, that I released recently. People can, I'll put a link in the show notes for those who want to have a copy of it. But I got some feedback on it, on a prediction that I made, right? And it goes, I'd probably say it takes what you just said and probably moves it at the needle slightly further, right? And it's the idea that the payroll payslip could actually not only be interactive and telling you why you've been taxed and why you've done those things, but also help you with your own financial planning. Now, I realize certainly in the UK, you can't give tax advice. You've got to be regulated. You know, that's not a payroll's responsibility. Is actually they're not allowed to give savings advice and investment advice. But I think if there's an opt-in option where you go, you know what, I'd like the AI to look at my payslip each month. I'm opting into the advice to the AI to give me some financial advice, or I'm giving that responsibility away with my permission to say, hey, look at my payslip. This is what you can tick some other boxes. This is what I earn. You know my earnings. This is my outgoings. Can you give me some good financial advice, and actually then put the money into those pots so it goes to an ISA, goes to my pension, goes to wherever? I think that really then helps payroll to make it more strategic, but also you're really supporting people with their financial wellness. Of course, I can't guarantee that advice is going to be the right advice, but people have their own risk profiles. They can make their own decisions. The human element is still there. But I do think AI can help through the interactive payslip and piece to say, actually, not only can I teach you what your tax is, but we can also help you manage your finances more sensibly and put it into the right places to save for a better future. That's what I would like to see AI do. I think that's an intelligent way.
Yeah, something similar to that would be your tax election, right?
Yeah.
It's so difficult. People go, well, look, I want to have more tax withholding, I want to have less tax withholding, and we don't make it as simple as we'll just pick a different percentage or whatever else. But there is a way to change your tax election. And what if the interactive payslip said, it allowed them to just model right there in real time? Say, well, if I want to do this, and then it direct them to the form and help them to go and do that for them.
Yeah, nice.
And yeah, you're right. The advice thing becomes kind of a barrier, but there's gonna be ways around it. You're gonna have to pull in, if you have a third party retirement services provider or something else, or you do financial modeling for them even without giving advice. You said, well, if you did this, you could do this, you could do this, right? What if I wanted to contribute 5% additional to the retirement scheme, the pension scheme in the UK? What would that do? And be able to just do that modeling for them right there. There's a lot of things you could do that right now people have to kind of figure out on their own in a disconnected way, and they don't really understand it. And there's just such an opportunity for us as an industry to just do better by our customers.
I couldn't Couldn't agree more. I get the sense you're incredibly solutions orientated. I love the coaching concept. What got you here won't get you there. And I think you're always in that future position, Gregory. It's been an absolute pleasure being able to quiz you and talk to you about your career and some of the amazing, phenomenal things you've done at Amazon. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to run through this very quickly. We've got the vault. I know our listeners are going to want to hear some of these quick responses. So 3 short, sharp questions for you. Number 1 is, drawing from your extensive career, what's one piece of timeless advice you would offer to payroll professionals today?
Timeless advice I'd give to payroll professionals. I would tell people, think about what you would, if you were 80 years old and you were retired, and what you would regret, and work backwards from there. And when this is particularly when you're making career choices or life choices or whatever else, think about what you at the end of your career, at the end of your life, would regret, and work to minimize that now.
Nice. Looking ahead, what do you envision will define the future of payroll?
I think the future of payroll is people work continuously when it's convenient for them. They need access to the elements of their pay continuously, and they need and deserve to be have access to their pay continuously. And so this notion of payroll as a batch framework, and the very word payroll and the word payday itself is inherently batch. I believe when we're doing the right thing, it will eventually retire. The word payday will fall out of use for the same reason my mother used to use the word shopping day. There was a day of the week where she designated going shopping. When I want to buy something, I pull out my phone, I go to Amazon, and I buy it. There's no day for those things. And in fact, that sounds very strange to my ears. To our children or our grandchildren, the word payday should sound strange to them. They should ask us. You should tell them there was this thing that was called payday, and we'd have to wait for it. And they'd go, well, wait a minute. When if you were tired and you slept, did you call that your sleep day? Or if you ate today, did you call that your eat day? No, you don't have an eat day and you don't have a sleep day. When you're tired, you sleep. When you're hungry, you eat. And when you work, you get paid. There's no need for there to be a day. And so continuousness is the future, and all of us just need to embrace it.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I've asked the question a couple of times on this show before. Will we ever see the dissolution of the monthly pay cycle here in the UK?
Yes.
In the UK, 95% of the workforce is paid monthly. We like tradition, we like routine, but I would agree with you. Yes is the answer, right? It's not going to stay there forever because we don't need to. We live in a society now where everything is instant and we can get everything instantaneous. Why hold things back? And
you've earned it. It's yours.
To support.
Why does your employer get to make you wait for it?
So last but not by no means least, a little bit of fun for you. If the payroll industry was a book, a song, or a film, you can choose whichever one. Which book, song, or film would it be, and why?
I think it would be the song "With or Without You" by U2 from the Joshua Tree in the early 80s. And the reason I say that is when payroll is done most perfectly, our customers get to forget that we're here. And the worse it is, the more they're aware of us, and so they can't live with or without us, and ultimately we can't live with or without them.
Oh, beautiful. What a beautiful way to finish the show. Gregory Harmer, VP of Finance at Amazon. Thank you so much for joining me on today's show. It's been wonderful. I knew it would be. Your reputation preceded you before today's show, and I think it's been a fascinating insight. I hope my listeners have enjoyed it too. Thank you for sharing all of your insights, your experiences, and the phenomenal growth story that you've experienced and actually led at Amazon. It's been absolutely fantastic. So thank you ever so much. I will, with your permission, share your LinkedIn profile with our listeners in the show notes. If you want to find out more, want to connect, please do that. There'll be a link to my website as well, jgrecruitment.com, for those that want to find out more about payroll recruitment globally. And for now, thank you to our listeners as well for tuning into the Payroll Podcast. Remember to subscribe, review, and share the show with your colleagues and friends. And I look forward to bringing more expert guests like Gregory Harmer to future episodes of the show. But Gregory, thank you so much. It's been my privilege, my pleasure, and an absolute honor to have you on the show today. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. I enjoyed it.
Today's episode of the Payroll Podcast has been sponsored by Deel, the all-in-one global people platform that simplifies how you pay your global teams. Deel's fully managed global payroll makes it possible to pay your entire team in over 100 countries and in over 200 currencies, all in one place. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deel is built to meet your unique business needs. With in-house customer success managers, local payroll experts, dedicated points of contact, and more, Deel's fully managed global payroll eliminates third-party handovers and it provides unmatched compliance and flexibility. In fact, they'll even help you track and flag the latest changes to payroll regulations before they even become an issue. And with 24/7 monitoring and best-in-class security protocols, your sensitive data is always protected. So are you ready to transform your global payroll system? If you are, click the link in the show notes and book your demo with Deel today.